Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shehakol nהיה b'dvarei.
L'chaim.
L'chaim, everybody. L'chaim, to life.
Time.
Life together. When we gather together,
Time.
especially in the year of Hakel, year of gathering. So it's good to gather, actual bodies and a soul in the same room, but also you can make a gathering like this as we do here every week, L'chaim, to bring us closer, a greater connection to Hashem, to each other.
Amen.
L'chaim, L'chaim. So, excuse me, are you Jewish? Is a very used term by Chabadniks. Whether they're carrying a pair of tefillin, lulav and esrog and sukkis, or shmura matzah before Pesach, and to try to find a fellow Jew to inspire, to encourage them, nudge them, to do a mitzvah. And this is something that we've been trained upon to make part of our lives, that we don't just care about our own mitzvah, but we are, welcome Leslie, we are been trained that we care about another Jew and their mitzvah. So therefore that term sometimes arouses, I've been doing it for many years here in Montreal, and before that as a yeshiva student. And you get all types of reactions. Sometimes people end up doing the mitzvah, but kind of out of feeling coerced. So of course the question is, what kind of value is there in a coerced mitzvah? Is there a value in it? Do we need to be fully engaged in order to do a mitzvah? And has the only value. So we're going to go back all the way to the beginning of the first Jew, and to try to get a little flavor, a little taste of how he dealt with things. And bearing in mind that his engagement was not with the Jewish world. He was engaged in a pagan world. And in a pagan world, of course, is a very different world than a Jewish world, right? But from there, we're going to learn some important things, and we're going to, of course, learn from Avram Avinu and how to apply that to today. So let us begin. Share the screen here. So again, our question is, what value does a mitzvah have done when it's not done without proper intention? That is the question. So let's go straight into it. And he planted an Ashel, Abraham planted an Ashel in Beersheba in English, and he called out in the name of God, the everlasting God. So what does it mean, an Ashel? That's not a usual term in the Torah. So the Medrash tells us the following: an argument between two Jews. What do you like? How do you like that? Two Jews arguing. And he planted an Ashel in Beersheba. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nachman disagreed over the translation of the word Ashel. Rabbi Yehuda said an Ashel is an orchard. As for anything you want, dates, grapes, or pomegranates. Rabbi Nehemiah said an Ashel is an inn. Ask for anything you want. Same thing, bread, meat, wine, or eggs. So we have a disagreement. What does it mean? But in the end, it's really the same idea. It's a hospitality center whether you're getting from fresh stuff from the orchard or you're getting cooked stuff from the inn, it is the same idea. And as a matter of fact, Rashi in the Gemara explains Eshel is an acronym in Hebrew for 3 words: Achila, Shtia, and Levia. So you take the word Eshel, Aleph, is Achila, which means food to eat. The Shin of Eshel is Shtia, which means drink. And then the Lamed is Levia, accompaniment. In other words, when you have guests, when you have people coming to you, so you have the mitzvah of giving food and drink, but it doesn't end there. Well, we're not going to go into this detail over here now, but there's also accompanying your guests when they leave. Interesting and important mitzvah. That shows true hospitality, because, when the hospitality that you have, that people come and you feed them and you take care of them, in a way, at times it could be, well, we have to be honest with ourselves. Sometimes when we have people come over, then we make sure the house is clean. Then we make sure we put out the nicest of the best, right? Why? Because you're trying to make an impression. So sometimes it could be more about you. Now, in the end, you're giving towards your guest. So that's wonderful. That's beautiful. And they get the benefit of the fact that, you cleaned up the house because guests are coming, or you gave the best of the best because it's guests. And, there's an idea of, the impression that you want to make or leave a good impression. And of course, there can be that motivation. But that's why the last thing, Levia, accompaniment, that you accompany the person to the door and even outside of the door. In other words, beyond your home, that shows a real concern for that individual. But there's more on that, but we'll leave it at that, right? So when this event take place, the beginning of the parsha, right? 3 days after Avram Avinu from last week's Torah portion circumcised himself and his entire household, as God had commanded, at the age of 99 years old. Now, in general, it's a painful experience, but probably at that age, it might be even more so. So God wanted to make sure that he was resting and taking care of himself. So he made the day a very hot and intense day. Something like here in Montreal today, it was 70 plus degrees. Yesterday it was 75 degrees. It was unreal. But it was much hotter than that. In order that he should not be bothered by travelers that were coming, back and forth. But Avram, that's not his style, right? What's his style? He's looking for guests. So he's sitting at the door, yearning for guests. So Hashem has pity on him. What does he do? Imagine what kind of pity he has on such a righteous individual. He sends him 3 guests, but not ordinary guests. They're angels that are disguised as humans. Okay, so the verse tells us, and he said, my master, I have found favor in your eyes. If I have found favor in your eyes, do not pass by your servant. That's what he says to the angels, right? Let a little water be brought, bathe your feet, and recline under the tree. And let me fetch a morsel of bread so that you may refresh yourselves. Then go on. Seeing that you have come to your servant's way. They replied, yes, do as you have said. Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, quick, prepare 3 saws of choice flour and knead and make cakes. Then Abraham ran to the herd, took a calf, tender and choice, and gave it to his servant boy, which is Ishmael, who hastened to prepare it. He took curds and milk and a calf and that had been prepared and set them before them. And he waited on them under the tree as they ate. Well, why did Avram do this? Is he just, some people they need to do good. You know why? Why do some people do good? Or a lot of people do good? Anybody? Because it makes them feel good. People
Maybe
do
so
it
nature.
because it makes them feel good, right? And that's their motivation. But that was not Avram Avinu's motivation, because he didn't need to do good to feel good, because he was whole and complete and worthy. So he didn't need to do the good in order to feel, as a broken person, to feel whole. No, he was whole, right? But he did it because he had an intent, an agenda, a holy agenda. And that is that people should call out in the name of God, as the Talmud tells us. The Talmud in Saita tells us, and he called out in the name of God, the everlasting God. We had that in the verse, right? We just had that in the verse that we just quoted. So he called out in the name of God. Rish Lakish said, don't read he called out, rather read that he caused others to call out. This teaches us that Avram, our patriarch, taught every wayfarer to call out in the name of God. He wanted people to call out in the name of God. How did he do that? After they had their fill of food and drink, they would arise to thank him. He would say, you did not eat my food. You ate what belongs to God, God of the world. Thank and praise he who spoke, and the world came into being. So folks, here we got it. We're setting the record straight. It was about over 4,000 years ago. Actually, just approaching 4,000 years. Let me just think for a moment. We are almost 4,000 years since this story took place. Because he was born in 1948, and this was after he was 75 years old, 1948, so that's another 52 years, and now we're 22, so that's 64. Yeah, so it's just shy of a dozen years or so when this story took place. There would be 4,000 years. Avram Avinu opened up the first Chabad house. And he knew, as we know, the fastest way that you can get a person's heart is through their stomach. So he would feed them. He would make them feel good and comfortable. But it wasn't in order that he should feel good, because he was a do-gooder by his nature, and he needed, to make himself feel complete and whole. So therefore he did the good. He didn't need that. But what he wanted to do is to bring to them a notion of God, and that they should thank God as a result. Now, although often he was very successful in what he was doing, not always. People sometimes refused. They didn't want. They insisted that, if I'm going to thank anybody, well, who's a pagan going to thank? Well, the personal idol, maybe they even were carrying with them. And if they weren't going to thank the idol, at least they would thank, okay, Avram. But to thank God, that was not necessarily, that wasn't in their universe. And some people were not open to that. So what did Avram do? So Medrash tells us, the following. If the wayfarer would agree to thank God, they would eat, drink, and depart. If he would not agree to thank God, Avram would say, pay me what you owe. The wayfarer would ask, what do I owe you? Avram would reply, a measure of wine is 10 coins, a measure of meat is 10 coins, and a measure of bread is 10 coins. Who gave you wine, meat, and bread in the wilderness? When the wayfarer would see no other way out, because the prices were exorbitant, they would say, blessed is God of the world, whose food we ate. Interesting. They changed their minds once they heard what they were expected to pay. So they figured, no, thanking God was a cheaper option. Which of course then brings us to the question. But first, l'chaim everybody, to life. So the obvious question is, what value does the blessing have when they're being coerced? Their hearts aren't in it. They're just mumbling a bunch of words to avoid paying a steep price. What do they have from it? What does Avram have from it? What does God Almighty have from it? And you might even go a step further and ask, this might be, the ultimate bait and switch. He baits them with food and switches it for God. If they were on board, okay, one thing, but it wasn't always the case. People didn't go for it. So what did he do? He pressured them. Here are the prices. This is what you got to pay. And now he says, well, or you could switch. Is that false in advertising? Is that an entrapment? What's going on over here? We need to understand. So let's first deal with the simple idea of, call it false advertising, if you will, an entrapment, whatever you want to call it, right? Let's understand what's going on over here. We'll go from one step to the next. So the Medrash says as follows: Avram would welcome the passerby. Once they ate and drank, he would tell them to say a blessing. They would ask, what shall we say? He would reply, say, blessed is the God of the world, whose food we ate. So according to this Medrash, we look closely. Avram did not advertise that he was giving a free lunch, right? Not only that, he didn't even run after people that they should come into his inn. He did not take an initiative to draw them in. And according to the Lavush, the commentators, a 15th century commentator, Rabbi Shmuel Yafi Ashkenazi, this explains how he acted and how everything was upfront, kosher. He explains in the text 4b, the Midrash states, Avram would welcome the passerby. This tells us Avram did not recruit visitors. Rather, word of his hospitality spread, and visitors would come on their own. Avram would welcome them and feed them in the manner of old innkeepers who receive visitors and serve them for a fee. Thus, Avram had a financial claim against his guests and had the right to forgive this claim if they chose to bless God. If they arrived expecting a free meal, it was their mistake. They should have asked up front. So with this, we clear up our first question. He did not lure visitors in with a false promise of free food, right? He set up an inn and he charged for the food, but he was willing to give a steep discount, not only a steep discount, a complete discount, if people were able and willing to thank God. So he never concealed this detail. So it's not false advertising, and definitely it was not entrapment. Actually, this made perfect sense. It wasn't a ploy. It was actually logical and consistent, as he continues to explain. Yafas Tayar, Rabbi Shmuel Yafi Ashkenazi. If they believed that the food came from Avram rather than from God, they would be obligated to pay him. After all, it's coming from me, so you got to pay. If the food came from God, right, meaning you recognize that it comes from God, you're blessing God for it, Avram had no claim against them because they could argue that God gave it to Avram so that they could give it to them. But now that they denied God and his ownership of the food, it is only right that they pay Abraham. Is that clear? If they were going to pay, there would be no limit to how much they would owe. For who can prepare a table in the wilderness? So he's not misleading at all. His arguments are perfectly consistent. He wasn't offering a discount, period. There's a fee for whatever you come in the wilderness and get a beautiful meal. But if you will listen to my Dvar Torah, hear me out, and come to recognize God as master of the universe and the one who gave this bounty, then you got a steep discount. If they originally were difficult about it, right, and they changed their mind, okay, it's no charge. So fine. So from a legal point of view, we got no problem here. Avram Avinu is doing everything, straight up front. Is no issue over here. But let's address the deeper, more real question, not the legal justification, but what does this mean exactly? Now, if he was in a conversation with people and they came to understand and appreciate God and therefore truly thank God, that we get, that makes sense. But for those who seemingly were coerced because of a high price, and because of that, they changed their minds, what value does that have? So
how do we know the animalistic soul wasn't open to being changed? That Abraham was just a facilitating means of having the animalistic soul accept God. They were just waiting for the flame to be lit. So when he said, thank God, it's not really a coercion. The flame was waiting to be lit.
So the challenge with that, though, thank you, Andrew. Very good question. What's the difficulty of that? See, Andrew, you know what your problem is? You know what your problem is? You're thinking and talking like a Jew, which that's beautiful, by the way. That's beautiful. So I should say that's a problem, but everything that's good also has its downside. What's the downside? You're thinking like a Jew, which we will get into the discussion about that later, after the Torah is given. We're talking about Avram Avinu to pagans that are not Jewish before the giving of the Torah. Right? So how does that fit in exactly? How do we understand that? Right? So that's, and we have to remember, we're talking about Avram Avinu, he's the Moshe Rabbeinu of his generation. He's the Rebbe of his generation. So everything has to be in consonance with him, with authenticity, right? So there's optics over here, right? What's the optics? It looks like a bit of a coercion. It looks like because of the high price, so how do we understand that, right? How do we deal with that we appreciate that it's completely authentic and a real expression of him rather than a tactic merely, right? If it's merely a tactic, that's not authentic and not pure. And the optics of it sounds that way, right? And again, we're before Matan Torah, before the giving of the Torah. But thank you for thinking like a Jew. Let's unpack this. So the first thing is that Avram Avinu, he's a master teacher. We have to know that, right? He is the master. He is the Rebbe. He is the Moshe Rabbeinu. So he has a way with him, a way with words. He has a way with explaining and bringing things to people. As a matter of fact, the Talmud tells us, Rav Chizda said to Avimi, we have a tradition that the Patriarch Avram's tractate on idolatry had 400 chapters. Ooh. He had a tractate with 400 chapters about idolatry, meaning that he had formulated in a tailored manner arguments. Because remember, what's he dealing? He's called Avram of Ivri, right? The Hebrew. Ivri coming from the word that he's on one side of the world versus the entire rest of the world. All the pagans on the other side of the world. So he is trying to bring the notion of God to the world. And the notion he's bringing to God to the world is God of the world, not God, faith that's beyond, but God is creator that's within. That means he had tailor-made arguments. 400 chapters mean every objection, every argument, any question that anybody would have, he had a response. He had the way to deliver the message in a way that it would be palatable, logically, reasonably, intellectually to people. He wasn't feeding faith, which would be something we'll discuss later, right? Because we're not talking about people of faith, we're talking about pagans. So he was the original influencer without social media. He was a powerful influencer, but he moved people by his rationale, by his logic, and of course by his authenticity and the passion that he had in the authenticity of who he was. So as the previous Rebbe says, our Rebbe's father-in-law, Avram, would explain with many parables and examples so that it would be well received and understood by his students. He was able to distill complex teachings about monotheism in such simple language that even lay people understood him. Those who did not understand could sense the truth in his words and would acknowledge that he was right. He spoke with such passion and love for God that even those who didn't understand him felt the vitality and the truth in his words and were compelled to agree with him. So that's by and large most of the people that he encountered. But yet, there were people that his arguments fell on deaf ears, right? Now, many teachers, when they have such a student, they usually talk to the other students in the classroom and they forget that student after a while because it seems like nothing is penetrating. But that's not an authentic teacher. That's not the master teacher of Avram Avinu. He recognized that some people, they had a layer that covered over them that didn't allow the words that he was saying to penetrate appropriately. He recognized it and he wouldn't give up on them. As the Rebbe explains in this week's Sikha, when he saw that some people did not take any of his explanations, this was because they were encased in an unusually resistant course into all things holy. So he would put them in a bind to create just enough pressure to break through their unusually coarse resistance. Once the crust was broken through, his previous arguments would begin to resonate with them, at least partially, and they would recognize God. They would then say, "Blessed is God of the world, whose food we ate." So Avram created some kind of shock value that would force them to reevaluate. Why did he do this? Is because they were coarse. They had a thick layer of a crust that covered over from their animal soul, that didn't allow the reasoning, the logic, and even his authenticity to penetrate into them. They were resistant. How do you get through that? Got to break through it. How? Okay, this is what it cost. All of a sudden, this is what it cost. These prices. I was ready for that. Well, where do you get this in the desert like that? What would that do? that would weaken their resistance. Their ego got a little deflated, right? And all of a sudden, that allowed them to hear his argument, would hear the points that he was teaching and trying to inspire them, that they would at least now be somewhat open. And then finally, he was able to inspire them. So in this sense, it was sincere. You know, I have many people in our Chabad community over here, including an artist of ours, Menachem Hillel. Very dear friend of ours, right? The only reason he's religious today is because there was a program, the Ivy League Torah study program in the Catskills, that was offering that you could come learn Torah for 6 weeks and get paid for it. I don't remember, it was like $1,500 or something, like $1,200 or something like that. You know, we're talking about over 30 years ago. It continues today, but I'm telling a story of 30 years ago, Menachem Hillel, right? And I promise you that stipend is what inspired that to several people are Chabadniks today, including our friend the artist, that enticed them that they would actually go to the program. Not only I don't have to pay and I'm getting, free room and board, not only I'm going to get some Torah learning, I'm going to make money from this. Ooh. But that doesn't mean that's why they studied Torah. And that's why the arguments that they were presented of why authentic Judaism is the path to take. But that brought them open to hear the arguments that were made, to hear the teachings. Otherwise, several of them, I'm sure, would not have crossed that threshold. That's exactly what Avram did. To get the person to cross the threshold, sometimes you got to give them something that's outlandish. Do something that's outlandish. So to pay somebody when really what you're getting is something eternal that you should pay for eternity for, right? Because after all, it changed your life, right? And of course, the person who is responsible to get you there. In 5 years, I had over 50 students that I sent there. Chaim is just one out of the 50, and about 15 to 20 of them are Lubavitcher Chassidim today. It's Montreal and beyond. Yeah. Chaim. So the arguments were compelling on their own right. But to get to that, to be able to hear the argument, they needed the stipend. Same thing with Avram Avinu. His arguments were very strong arguments, but not everybody's ready to hear them. There's sometimes things that cover over don't allow you to be open to something. So what made them open? Well, not only you're not getting a stipend, but you're going to have to pay full price, right? What you pay for in the desert. This really shows something beautiful. Avram's behavior. It's turning it on its head. Rather than apologizing for Avram or defending his behavior, right? Like, come on, what are you doing? Coercing people. The Rebbe actually puts him on a pedestal and demonstrates how loving Avram is. That he was motivated by a love, but he did the love with toughness. It's not by accident that this teaching comes from the Rebbe. Because the Rebbe was the same way. The insight that we have into Avram is the Rebbe's insight. We don't have it from other commentators. because that's what the Rebbe is. He sees the best in everyone, never gives up on anyone. Everybody can grow. As the late Jonathan Sachs said, most people look at others and see what they see. Great people look at others and see what they are. The greatest of the great, and the Rebbe was the greatest of the great, look at others and see what they could become. The Rebbe, like Avraham Avinu, never judged a person for who they were today, but what they could become tomorrow. Herman Wouk, famous author, This Is My God, right? He once lamented to the Rebbe and said, by the way, he just passed away like a year or two ago at 104, if I remember, something like 104. He lamented the Rebbe, today's youth, you can't tell them anything, he said. I'm talking probably this was in the 60s when he said this to the Rebbe. So the Rebbe replied to him, yes, but you can inspire them to do anything. Different way to look at things, right?
Isn't that the philosophy of the shlichim going out?
Absolutely.
I know that, I've been putting on tefillin now for 9 years, and it started, I was putting on, the rabbi, when he first moved to town, had, like a weekend thing, put on tefillin.
Right.
And one of the shlichim, who's now a rabbi in Australia, Rabbi Block, he said, got to up your game. So why don't you put it on a couple more times? So I put it on a couple of days. I go, this is stupid. Why don't I just do what I'm supposed to do and put it on every day? And, put mezuzahs on put in the office and so forth, so on. So
right.
They were looking at not just that,
Yeah,
more.
Exactly. So this is what Avram saw in his visitors. He did not see a shallow person incapable of a lofty philosophy. Instead, he saw passionate believers waiting to break out. Sometimes they needed a little prodding. Sometimes they needed a strong kick in the butt. Not a figurative kick in the butt, right? Not a literal one. What was the kick in the butt? The kick in the butt was, okay, here's your bill. That felt like a kick in the butt, right? But that was only in order to, okay, to reconsider their position, to open up a crack that some light could enter through the thickness, the coarseness of the animal's soul that was crippling them, in order that they should ultimately be inspired, and from that inspiration, that they should see the light. So Avram did not give them a money trap. What he gave them was a love tap. Sometimes a love tap doesn't mean it's done in a, it's not done with a toughness. Sometimes it is. So, as the Rebbe explains in the Sikha this week, we might suggest, at least by way of allusion, Avram's words put them in a financial bind and thus force them to consider their inner vice. That is, the vice of their own coarseness and resistance to holiness. He would help them realize that their unusually strong coarseness was a cause of their resistance to God. This realization brought them around to saying, "Blessed is the God of the world, whose food we ate." Now let's take this even a step further and see that in the very argument that he would make in this instance about the food itself, that it itself was a case in point for the point that he ultimately wants to bring out. In other words, his argument was we're the origins of the food, right? Remember what we said earlier, we brought down from the Medrash. If it's my food, then it's mine. You owe me. You owe it to me, right? But if it's not my food, it's God's. Oh, that's a different story. So take a look over here. So what did Avram do? He located in a barren desert, a place where no grapes, dates, pomegranates, or drinking water. God was there for him in this place that didn't support human habitation. And he provided him with so much bounty that it sufficed to provide meat, wine, and bread for all wayfarers. Avram therefore fed all passerby. If they would accept his proposition and bless God without demanding proof for God's existence, all was good. If not, Avram would present them the arguments that provide divine providence. He would say, if as you believe God does not meddle in our lowly affairs, you must ask yourself, who brought the wine and bread that you ate to the wilderness? And you need to pay that cause. If you are prepared to accept it for free, you likely agree that it came from God. Once they saw that they were in a bind, namely that they were forced to consider the origin of their meal, they would admit that their food was provided in the wilderness by God. They would then proclaim, blessed is God of the world, whose food we ate. In conclusion, they did not thank God to avoid the fee. Rather, Avram used the question of the food's origin to demonstrate conclusively that God is the first cause of all existence. So look at that. His whole agenda, so-called, in other words, what's he driven by? A commitment to God to bring people closer to him. And as we know, through food, right, through the stomach, you can get to the individual. You can get to them. But here it goes even further. The food was the instrument of what's its origin? Where does it come from? Right? So he would make the argument and go back one step, each step of the way, and come to a conclusion, as the argument would be, if it's coming from me, then you got to pay me. If it comes from the original origin of where everything comes from, then it's God-given. And if God gives, it's yours. Just like it was mine to give, it's yours to take, right? So the very argument was in the very origins of the food itself. So Avram wasn't merely using the fee for the food to break through an emotional impasse in order to get to their minds and to their hearts, but it's actually a pedagogical tool that he used in the food to demonstrate the very point that he was trying to teach, that God is the cause of all existence. If you recognize that he's the cause of all of existence, so thank him. Is that clear? Yeah.
Of course.
And that's how he made his case for God. So he didn't threaten people. He only used the financial pressure that they should consider his arguments. Actually, he never had to come on to the second half and actually impose the financial, to impose the financial, the payment, because he's authentic, because he is the Moshe Rabbeinu, the Rebbe of his generation. People saw the truth in him, the authenticity in him, And therefore, once they were, the outer layer, the crust was broken through and a ray of light could enter, then Avram's teachings and his arguments got through and he motivated people. Now, that is all, as we mentioned earlier, as Andrew brought up, prior to Sinai. But since Sinai, so we're dealing about a different story now. As the Rabbi says in the Parsha, in this week's Sicha, no matter the circumstances of a Jew, he or she has a godly soul. Therefore, even while committing a sin, a Jew wants to remain a Jew and wants to do God's bidding. It follows that only the Jew's outer crust requires piercing. The internal core is intact even before the outer crust is pierced. When we apply pressure to pierce the external coarseness, our purpose is to reveal the intrinsic holiness that is already present within. So a Jew pulsates with a divine soul with each and every one of us. That soul, though, is got an outer crust that sometimes is very thick and makes us resistant to the divine light. And we need to break through it. We need to break through. Once we do that, then we can touch the intrinsic faith and beauty that is in the soul of every Jew. At the Pesach Seder, we say to the Ben Rasha, to the wicked son, if you were there, you wouldn't have been redeemed. Why? Because in Egypt, before Matan Torah, before the giving of the Torah, if you wouldn't be part of the Jewish community and you would consider yourself separate, then you wouldn't be redeemed. You wouldn't be redeemed. But now it's after Matan Torah, you will be redeemed with each and every single one of us, even though you have such an attitude. So why are we saying it in negative? Because sometimes a person's got the outer layer is not allowing the internal intrinsic nature of the soul to be revealed. And it makes a resistance. Sometimes you have to give it a little, a knack in order to reach that. But this then we can appreciate. Excuse me, are you Jewish? Sometimes people melt when they hear that question in order to do a mitzvah. But sometimes they're resistant or apathetic, right? So then we would say to them, so do it, you don't want to do the mitzvah of tefillin for yourself, so do it for me. I might say that. No, hey, make another Jew happy. Do it for me. Is there any value in that? Absolutely. Because today we're after Matan Torah, and as the Rebbe says that even when we're doing a sin, the soul it still has faith and is connected to God. So all the more so when you're doing a mitzvah, even though you're doing it not for the intrinsic value of the mitzvah, right? You're just getting it, let me get this guy off me, But the Jew really wants to do the mitzvah. It's the inner core of their soul. And even though they don't hear their soul right now, but their soul is pulsating with that desire. Sometimes it's so, I would say to a Jew, when he would tell me, no, I'm not interested. So I would say, sometimes I would say, depending, in order to pierce, to get through. Says, I don't believe you that you don't want to do the mitzvah. Sometimes they would smile. Sometimes they get very upset. Once a guy said to me, I hate you Chabadniks, because you don't even allow me to believe what I believe, that you don't allow me even to believe what I believe, that I don't believe in this stuff. And you say, no, I don't believe that you don't believe. We don't. Sometimes, the outer layers are so coarse, it doesn't allow the lights, but we know the light's there. And we know that sometimes we have to give it a little nudge, a little extra, in order that the light should should come through. But in the end, there's no doubt that is the desire of every Jew. So, by the way, we're all Chabadniks, right? Meaning that it's not just the Chabad rabbis who have to go out there and ask, excuse me, are you a Jew? To do a mitzvah with another. We don't, right? This is incumbent upon all Jews to look out for another Jew to help them with a mitzvah. We are all obliged to do that. As the Rebbe says, the Sikha this week, the lesson from Abraham's story is obvious. The actions of our patriarchs point the way for their descendants. Therefore, we must behave as Abraham did and work to publicize God's presence throughout the world. Should someone ask, what was accomplished by this effort? After all, the Jew we convinced to recite a blessing, to chant the Shema, or to pray, did it unwillingly and without heart. The one who put on tefillin did so to be free of pressure. Whether they will do the mitzvah again tomorrow, we don't know. So what's the point? And other such arguments. We respond by relating the story from the Torah, which serves as a lesson to us. If in the days of Abraham, when he dealt with non-Jews before the Torah was given, this approach achieved the end goal of God's words to Abraham, you familiarize me to my creations. How much more so after the Torah was given, when we deal with Jews who want to be Jewish and want to do God's bidding. Our efforts with these Jews are surely consistent with their inner desire. Moreover, it is likely that the gentle pressure that brought them to do one mitzvah will inspire them to do another mitzvah, to the point that they will be openly want to perform all the mitzvahs in their complete form. This effort to publicize the name of God in the world in a manner which makes God known to all his creations will hasten the time when, measure for measure, the earth will be filled with the knowledge of God. As it says in Isaiah, this will be achieved by the king who will arise from the house of David and inspire all of Israel to walk in the path to repair the breaches of both the written and the oral Torahs during the true and complete redemption by Mashiach, our righteous Redeemer. So, key points. Avram offered free food for those who were willing to thank God. Those who were unwilling were charged exorbitant fees. Many changed their mind when they saw the fee. They did not thank God to avoid the fee. The fee merely forced them to listen to Avram's arguments and reasoning. Once they listened to his presentations, they agreed with him and thanked God. The Jew's inner core is always holy, even when the Jew commits a sin. When the outer core is penetrated by any means, gentle pressure, peaceful persuasion, financial incentive, and the Jew does a mitzvah, the mitzvah is authentic because the Jew's core wants to do the mitzvah. When someone pressures us to do a mitzvah, they're not disrespecting our wishes. On the contrary, they're expressing their confidence in our inner desire to do the mitzvah. Chaim, everybody, Chaim. Any questions? All right. We'll see you soon, TRC.
Rabbi,
Yes.
is my understanding that Eliezer, his servant, did not went back to being idolatry or something? Did he leave the fold? No.
I don't. I mean, unless there's some teachings that says.
No, I
something
thought I
like
heard that teaching.
Not to my knowledge. I mean, not to my knowledge. No. All right. Thank you. Any other
Okay.
questions? Andrew.
No, I was just gonna say, yeah, I mean, I remember growing up, even that, you ever see Jews leave with Abraham, right? Supposedly after everything, even then, he led them to the door, explained where they had to go. You ever see Jews leave a house? It takes an hour to get out. They get up, put their coat on, then you talk, right? And then they get to the doorway itself, and then it's even more. Then they might get out on the porch. It's a whole adventure.
Yeah,
That comes from Abraham.
exactly. Yeah, the Jewish way. Very good. Thank you. All right, folks. God bless you. Good Tavach. Shavua
Thank
Tov.
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Shabbat tov.